am Alyssa Steinzig,
Ugh.
and this is...
What the Trans, US edition.
Well, you should say your name also.
And I'm me. Sorry, I'm Valeriya Martindale.
There you go. And this is our first episode, and I'm here to ask you the most important question. Would you rather be Julianne Brunoise or Batonade?
I'm sorry, what?
Yes, that's right. I don't want to be cut into small pieces either.
Oh, we're off to an auspicious start.
Absolutely. Okay, so this is the first episode of the United States / North America spinoff of What the Trans UK. We're going to talk about every horrible, shitty, stupid thing happening in America, primarily focused on trans and queer people.
Of which there are many.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot just in that genre alone, much less just like the broader, stupid, shitty things that happen in this country. You just can't get past it. Today, we're going to talk about primarily anti-LGBTQ legislation in America.
Of which there's a little bit, as it turns out.
God, there's so much. So I really have to give a huge thank you to the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, for their legislative session tracker that tracks all of the anti-LGBTQ bills that are worming their way through the American legislative system in every state, of which there are 478 as of the recording of this podcast that they are tracking.
It is a lot, and trying to keep up with it on an individual level is just impossible.
Yeah, unless you're Erin Reed, she seems to just kind of be on top of that all the time. I'm just me, so I need the ACLU to tell me what's happening. And they did. So far, like I said, 478 bills. We're looking at 120 of them have been introduced. 255 are advancing through the legislative process. 89 have been defeated before being passed into law.
Between the two of us, we have dealt with this kind of thing before. We've both written about ongoing trans legislation as part of the Trans Data Library project we both worked on, which is why we're doing this right now, coincidentally.
Created by Assigned Media and its founder, Evan Urquhart, who we will also be talking to later about a little trove of forum posts leaked from the WPATH internal forums. If you don't know who they are, that's the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. And that's just a lot of endocrinologists across the entire world who help form standards of care for trans health care. They're kind of a bit paternalistic, as I say in the interview that we'll hear later. But a lot of them are doing their best, and you'll be excited to hear what's been leaked. What horrible things have been leaked by the brave soldiers of the gender critical movement.
Oh boy, that one letter is really worth sticking around for, because that one alone you could really talk about for a while, but we'll get to that. Oh my
God. Yes. Oh, we talk about that towards the end, and it is just... Whew. Okay, so in the interest of time, we'll move right into our first bill. We're going to talk about Ohio House Bill 68, which is the Save Adolescents from Experimentation, or SAFE Act, and also the Save Women's Sports Act. It's two acts tied into one bill. And to give you just a little timeline of what has happened here, it was introduced in the House of Representatives for Ohio on February 27th, 2023. A lot of these bills that come up will take, over a year to work their way through various committees and wind up on the floor and get voted on and signed by the governor, or in this case, not signed by the governor. And then it was passed in the House on June 21st of 2023, introduced in the Senate on September 12th of 2023, passed in the Senate on December 13th, also 2023. And then on Friday, December 29th, Governor DeWine of Ohio announced that he was going to veto the bill. And his explanation for that, he said, were I to sign House Bill 68, or were House Bill 68 to become law, Ohio would be saying that the government knows better what is medically best for a child than the two people who love that child the most, their parents. Now, that's what Governor DeWine said at the time.
We'll see how that shook out
later. Yeah, he did some things later that might run a little bit counter to that statement. And then, let's see. Famously, you may have heard in the news that the Ohio state senators and representatives came back from their winter break a week early to override Governor DeWine's veto on January 24th, 2024. And this bill will take effect on April 24th, 2024. So that's coming up next month. This is going to be passed. Would you like to talk about what the bill does, or would you like me to go over it?
If you'd like, I can read the wording as has passed, and we can bounce off a little bit of the how common it is for this phrasing to be used in a lot of the different things that they're trying to get rid of. Of course, we'll touch on them a little bit more, I think, in the Utah bills that we've got coming up. But as passed, the bills will do the following. First of all, it's going to disallow a court from limiting a parent's rights and responsibilities or parenting time based on the parent's refusal to acknowledge a child's gender identity or refusal to seek gender-affirming care for their child. So, bad parents can be shitty to their kids, unfortunately.
Yep, and when you inevitably separate or divorce from your child's shitty parent, and, you're in court talking about who's going to get how much time with the kiddo, this cannot be factored into it. The fact that one of the parents refuses to acknowledge the gender identity or allow pursuing gender-affirming care for the child. So, what we're looking at is refusing to treat an ailment, right? This is essentially if your kid had a fucking broken leg and the dad was like, well, I don't think we should affirm healing of the body. I think that's bad and we shouldn't do that.
I mean, if you let it go through puberty, most broken legs will heal themselves.
Most broken legs will actually desist. That's not true.
This is actually something that's come up in some of our writing. I can't remember the name of the parent, but there was a parent who specifically, as part of
their... Was it the one in Texas? The father. The father who was
It was actually the mother that I wrote about.
Oh, okay. I wrote about a different one.
Oh, then we had two separate cases.
More than one.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, in which case it can be brought into divorce proceedings, and in this case did lead to her losing custody of the child. So
good.
Something for them to... Yeah, I mean, good, but unfortunately no longer in Ohio.
Yeah. I was going to say, the one that I wrote about was, I think, and I cannot remember the names of any of these people, but this is a kid that was written about quite a bit. There were a few profiles done on, I think it was a transgender girl, and her father will not acknowledge her correct, her preferred pronouns, name, anything, does not want her to seek gender-affirming care. The kid and her mother, I think, have moved to California, and the father was trying to fight, essentially, to have the kid brought back to him for fear that in California, the mother would help the child seek gender-affirming care when she wasn't technically allowed to. And then I think that the Supreme Court of Texas or a federal court or something like that kind of laughed him out of court and said, we can't be punitive about things that might happen. Like, that's not how the law works.
We can't just stop you from moving.
Yeah.
Unless something's weird's going on.
I think that, that kid's still not getting to transition as far as I know. This guy, her dad, I think ran for a local election of some sort in Texas and got fucking flattened by his opposition because, as we're seeing over a lot of local elections across the country, this kind of single issue, social issue with trans people platform is just not paying out for most people.
No, thankfully not.
Yeah, which is not to say that, we're talking about some pretty nasty legislation being done here. So, not to say that things aren't going badly in places, but yeah, I mean, you're seeing a lot of these people lose elections and stuff.
Our next point here, the bill will also disallow physicians in Ohio from performing quote-unquote gender reassignment surgery on a minor, prescribe cross-sex hormones or puberty-blocking drugs to minors, or aid and abet anyone else in those pursuits. Physicians may continue to prescribe cross-sex hormones or puberty-blocking drugs to minor patients if those patients have been continuous Ohio residents since at least the effective date of the House bill, if that treatment precedes the effective date of the House bill, and importantly, if the physician determines that terminating treatment would cause harm to the patient, which, I mean, obviously it's going to cause some mental trauma to the child, but...
Clearly. Like, we know this. I don't know how... And a lot of the language in these bills is very vague. They don't define exactly how some of these things would work. There's another part of this coming up that will be very relevant to, that the wording is just clearly impossible for somebody to properly parse, possibly, by design, right? And, I want to touch on, too, something that you mentioned here in that block is... Ohio physicians can no longer perform gender reassignment surgery on minors.
A thing that happened all the time. Just handing them out.
All the time. And so basically none of these procedures actually happen on minors, with the exception of sometimes young people with breasts, because non-binary people, transmasculine people, etc., will be able to get top surgery before they turn 18, sometimes when they're 15, 16, 17, sometimes with parental consent, maybe all the time with parental consent. I don't know the laws in every state. This is still a thing that very rarely happens. This is not a common thing. And certainly, sexual reassignment surgery, the alteration of your genitals in any capacity, not happening to underage patients. Just not happening anywhere in the country, has never happened, but they want you to think it's happening. This is the through line they always use, is mutilating children's genitals.
Oh, yeah.
Not a real thing that's happening. Well, except to intersex babies, right?
Well, oh, yeah. I mean, that's fine, because they're not trans yet that we know.
Exactly, which these people are never talking about that.
No,
they like to say, well, intersex people are a very small percentage of America. Yeah, shut up. Shut your mouth.
It's a lot of... backdoor statements, I guess you could call them, where at any point a physician can just sort of check out and be like, hey, sorry, but the bill said that I gotta do this thing and this thing. It's all so specific. I just can't. And throw your hands up. And then if they don't do that, it just makes it more difficult for people who are going through the normal process. It's just bad for everyone.
Just an easy justification to kind of get yourself out of any potential trouble. But then, of course, any physicians who actually give a shit about their trans patients are put in these horrible binds where they're just sort of forced to act against commonly agreed practices. WPATH has their standards of care that are widely accepted by pretty much every serious medical organization in the world, not UAC PEDs. But now these people, doctors and surgeons and therapists and so on and so forth, are put in this position where they just have to deny the reality of the situation, and they can't help, young people who need help, who they would like to help.
It's terrible. It will also conveniently disallow physicians from diagnosing or treating minors for a gender-related condition without first obtaining the consent of at least one parent, at least one legal custodian of the minor, or the minor's guardian. So,
which again, already generally a thing. I mean,
except in the rare case where I guess a runaway child happens to swing by a Planned Parenthood on the way.
Yeah, I mean, the doctors generally don't see children or underage patients without at least some amount of communication with whoever is their legal guardian. That's just super fucking normal, I can't think, when I was under the age of 18, I can't think of a single time I just went to the doctor by myself.
No, it didn't happen. At the very least, someone had to drive me most of the time because, just the woes of growing up without a car at a certain point.
Oh, yeah.
It is interesting that it won't let them diagnose at all. You would have to stop treatment the second they say anything, run and ask their parent, and then come back and be like, oh, I have terrible news. Yeah,
your child has gender dysphoria. Can I diagnose them?
Can I tell them, please? Can we just put this on the chart? It would also disallow physicians from diagnosing or treating minors for a gender-related condition without first screening for other comorbidities that may be influencing the minor's gender-related condition, such as depression, anxiety, ADHD, and ASD, as well as physical, sexual, mental, and emotional abuse. You know what might make a kid sad? Being trans and not getting treatment for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also ASD, there's autism spectrum disorder is how that's medically referred to generally, even though it's not a medical disorder, but whatever.
Right.
That's the wording in the bill. Yeah, and this is a thing that we see. We saw this in Missouri when Andrew Bailey, yes, your beloved home state.
Never been prouder.
The temporary interim attorney general, Andrew Bailey, passed those very draconian laws ahead of the much more draconian laws that the state legislature passed about transitioning for both youth and adults, incredibly. This was a big thing is, well, you need to go get therapy. You're going to have to get therapy for a year, 2 years, 3 years. Who can afford that? Can children afford that? How much do children get paid these days?
Last time I checked, unless they're working in the coal mines over on the East Coast, not that much.
Yeah, or a McDonald's in Kentucky or whatever it was.
Oh, yeah.
We're seeing industrial revolution kind of children working in dangerous locations making a resurgence. It's in vogue again. I think that's pretty exciting.
You don't want to burn adults' hands. You might need those for something important, but kids, they'll bounce back.
Well, the kids are very small. They can climb inside the machines more easily.
Hey, could you get little Timmy inside the mangler for me real quick? One of the reasons I left Missouri was because of all the bills being passed, and especially with how much they interfere with adult care, which I have been adult for quite a while. And it's astounding to see. I mean, of course, their whole goal is to be... Yeah, their whole goal is to be like, well, let's stop it for kids because you don't want to hurt kids. Oh, well, maybe depressed people might be misled somehow. Yeah.
They're gonna move the goalposts. We're seeing this in multiple places. Missouri being kind of the breeding ground for that. I think Florida has also done that. This next part is particularly fun.
Oh, that part's fun. But first, I want to touch on screening for physical, sexual, mental, and emotional abuse. How are they going to do that? Are they going to bring in caseworkers to check out the kids' homes?
Could be. Maybe through the mandated therapy, right? Famously, people don't become trans because they were sexually, mentally, or emotionally abused.
Yeah.
Though, of course, higher rate of sexual abuse for trans youth. I think I actually mentioned that statistic later here in our notes.
Our next point, which is equally fun, HB 68 does not prohibit physicians from treating with surgery or medicine intersex patients or patients who have an infection, injury, disease, or disorder that has been caused or exacerbated by the performance of gender transition services.
Yes, I love this. I think this is so fucking ridiculous, right? Have you what the fucking J.G. Wentworth commercial about have you been injured by being transgender? Has somebody provided you gender transition services that harmed you?
You've been crept up onto the street and given free drugs and HRTs.
And if you're even looking into surgeries, right? Top surgery, bottom surgery, facial feminization, whatever the hell, these things don't have any significantly higher rate of infection or injury than any other surgery. In fact, most of them are quite a bit safer than other forms of plastic surgery. They have a much lower rate of regret. We know that.
Yeah.
And this supposition that somebody might be like, they gendered at me too hard and now I need help.
I'm afraid it might be, if I were to speculate with how certain anti-trans activists, people who have, I wouldn't say experimented, have explored their gender identity and have later come to regret it, and then start lawsuits based on I was under the age of 18 and they tried to help me in any way, so naturally I want to go to court about this. I'm afraid that might be sort of a setup to pivot into making legal action easier at some point in the future.
Could be. I mean, I'm not, neither of us are lawyers, but that certainly could be the goal. And that's a thing you've written about quite a lot. That was kind of your beat with the trans data library is these, we'll call them women, just because that's how they're currently identifying themselves, but people like Prisha Mosley, I believe her name is, people like that who have appeared in the last few years. There's less than a dozen of them, and claim they were poor innocent young girls rushed through the gender affirming care pipeline, put on hormones, granted double mastectomies, whatever, and then came to realize that actually they weren't trans, that there were other problems that were not fixed by the surgeries or medicines that they took, and now they're angry about it. It's everybody else's problem now. It's
really not that common.
It's not. Which is why they have to fly out the same...
Everywhere. Every time, it's the same 6 people, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and we had another fantastic writer on the Transdata Library, Mira, did an article for Assigned Media, I think last week or the week before, about one of these people who I think a mother maybe in like an anti-trans mothers group or something like that. I can't remember if it was somebody famous or not. My brain is mush. But this woman was like, look how quickly I can get on hormones. Haha. And then she went through the, what's that California Kaiser Permanente, I think, and tried to get hormones, and it took her like 10 months.
It took her a while, yeah.
Yeah. So, I think this suggestion that this is like a rushed pipeline might be a little overblown.
Rushed compared to the UK, maybe, but...
Oh, certainly.
I mean, comparatively, the heat death of the universe is a little faster than that. Yeah. The bill will also disallow Medicaid coverage for any of the above for minor individuals. So anything medical, of course, they're not going to touch.
Yeah. So, most states in America have some kind of Medicaid coverage for underage residents of the state. Like the state I grew up in, Tennessee, has TennCare. Famously, the only people who can get on TennCare are under 18 or pregnant women. That's it. Right? Really, really covering all the bases of people who might need help. And I had to get the TennCare glasses when I was a kid.
Oh, no.
You'd go through because you could go to a private optometrist. I did. And then you get through the screening and all, and they're like, all right, we've got glasses. Are you on TennCare? Yeah, I'm on TennCare. And they bust out. They put away the nice boxes of cool glasses, and they bust out the like two boxes of the saddest wireframe nightmares you've ever seen in your life. The cheapest glasses ever created by mortal hands.
The bill also demands that any school that participates in athletics competitions or events administered by an organization that regulates interscholastic athletic conferences or events must segregate gendered teams by sex, not gender identity. Explicitly, they disallow participation by individuals of the male sex, quote unquote, on teams or in competitions designated only for participants of the female sex. Trans men can just compete wherever they want. I guess they didn't think that far ahead to nobody's grand surprise.
Yeah, the language is very specifically about trans girls. And any team that is doing any kind of athletic competition, some kind of sport event, right? Like a basketball game, baseball game, football game, whatever. Football games famously gender segregated. Mm-hmm. When they separate these teams out, you are separated legally by your genitalia. You cannot be put onto a team based on your gender identity. So effectively it's interesting because a lot of these states you actually see effective bans on trans girls competing in any capacity. They can't even compete on men's teams in a lot of states.
Oh, yeah.
That do these blanket sports bans. Ohio says it's fine. They can play on the men's team.
How progressive of you, Ohio.
And then trans men can go wherever. So you're going to wind up with these fantastic situations. Like, what was that young man in Texas, Brigg, something like that, who was a wrestler, either high school or collegiate wrestler. And Texas said, you can't wrestle with the other boys. And Max said, well, I'm going to wrestle. So he just beat the shit out of every woman that they put him up against. Because, of course, this guy's taking testosterone to fucking medically transition. He's got big boy muscles and shit. Of course he's going to beat these girls. Like, come on. And like, he doesn't want to be there. He wants to wrestle against other boys. And they say, nope. So this is the fairness in sports that's being protected by the Republicans. Let me grab the next one here because I want to dig into this a little bit. So the next big thing that the bill does is it claims that the vast majority, those are their words, of gender non-conforming or transgender children, quote, come to identify with their biological sex in adolescence or adulthood. So what they're saying is that if you are 9, 10, 11, and you say, I'm actually a girl, I'm actually a boy, you will desist from that feeling by the time you reach your teen years, adulthood, whatever. This is not true. This is factually incorrect. Aside from even just anecdotal evidence, any trans person could tell you that's not fucking true, except Prisha Mosley when she's in denial. And we have a study to back that up. Jason Rafferty who is with the American Academy of Pediatrics, which is the good pediatricians organization that has, hundreds
more than
of
100 members. Yeah.
Compared to the American College of Pediatricians, who have, I think, 700 members, the leaks confirmed, something like that. 1% as compared to the American Academy of Pediatrics. But so Jason Rafferty published a study called Ensuring Comprehensive Care and Support for Transgender and Gender Diverse Children and Adolescents. You can go look this up. The AAP has all of their publications up on their website from their journal Pediatrics. And yeah, I mean, the bottom line is that this is not true. We know that young trans people, when they say they are trans, generally are correct, and that bears out into adolescence, into their teen years, into adulthood. Generally, and the study specifically says, quote, most children have a stable sense of their gender identity by age 4, and prepubertal children who assert a transgender or gender diverse identity know their gender as clearly and as consistently as their cisgender peers. There's another paper by Christina Roberts, MD, called Persistence of Transgender Gender Identity Among Children and Adolescents, which essentially says the same thing. She says, quote, if gender dysphoria persists during puberty, it is very likely permanent. When would you say you knew you were trans?
My case is a little different from the story that I usually heard from my trans peers. And I found it's not as uncommon as I thought it was, but I didn't really understand the concept of gender, having a fairly sheltered life. I mean, I got the idea of having a mom and dad and masculine and feminine roles, but the thought of gender applying to me didn't even begin to settle in my head until puberty hit. And then when puberty hit, it all started to come out, and all of a sudden there was a horrible burden of knowing that I'm not growing up the way I feel like I should be. So by the time I was maybe 13 or 14, I had really come to terms with the fact that something was wrong, and I didn't have the language to describe it at the time because it was the 2000s, the early 2000s, and the best you would see is a slur on the internet, and that was about it.
Yeah.
So,
or you'd watch Boys Don't Cry.
Oh yeah, or Sleepaway Camp, and then go, oh. So yeah, in my case, a little later than you'd normally hear, but that's never changed. Like, as soon as I knew something was wrong, for me, it's been persistent through my entire life. Never once have I gone, no, you know what? On second thought, guess I'm just a guy.
Yeah, I'm in a similar boat. Of course, when you and I met, I think you already knew that you were trans.
Yes,
generally, but I did not, and I would not for about another decade after we met.
It took you a while. Yeah, I was surprised.
Yeah,
you were the last person on my mind who I expected would be like, "Hey, by the way, I think I'm trans."
Yeah, and it's because I, like you, I didn't have the language or even the knowledge to even conceptualize this idea of you can be a girl. For a long time, I knew things were bad. I knew I didn't feel right. I was disassociative, but I leaned very hard into masculinity because, like a lot of trans women, early on, I learned that if you don't present in the way they want or expect you to, you are punished for it. Any hint of femininity, or gender divergence, and they punish you. So yeah, I leaned very hard into masculinity. Didn't realize I was trans when I was 24. I met a trans woman on the internet, and I started talking to her, and I asked her questions, and then, a week later, I was like, God, shit, I'm trans. Okay. And ever since then, yeah, I've never faltered in that, never really questioned myself. I think I think early on you maybe have those thoughts like, am I truly special enough? Is it me? Is that fair to say that it's me? Because you wonder these things like, why me, right? Questions you move past because there's really not a good answer to those.
No, not really.
No, but I've never doubted it. Yeah, and every person that I've personally known who knew they were trans from a very young age has never wavered. They've certainly been told that they aren't men or women, that they are whatever their assigned gender at birth is. But as far as personal feelings, they don't go away, and we see that with these detransitioners we were talking about. A lot of them have discussed publicly that they still experience gender dysphoria. that detransitioning has not fixed these problems, the same way that they say transitioning didn't fix them. So the next point is similar, just more medical information. They claim that suicide, psychiatric morbidities, and mortality rates, quote, remain markedly elevated after inpatient gender reassignment surgery. Also false. And if you have engaged with anti-trans activists, whether you're trans or cis, you probably know what they're talking about. It's a 2011 study from Sweden on regret rates post-SRS, right? And the author of the study, and I'm probably going to say this woman's name wrong, Cecilia Dejne, has dispelled these myths herself repeatedly. She said, "Oh, I don't have it. I'm a fool." I can't remember who she was interviewed by, but she was interviewed and she said, quote, "Commenting on articles, speaking with journalists, and talking about this problem at conferences." That's how she has to dispel these myths and correct the record, as it were, because so many anti-trans activists use this study to suggest that trans people who get SRS, who undergo surgery, are actually worse off after the fact, if, or the same level of bad. We know this isn't true. Cecilia herself said that medical transition is, the word she uses, efficacious, that it results in the measurable diminishment of gender dysphoria. But she did say that, and I'm quoting her here, trans people as a group also experience significant social oppression in the form of bullying, abuse, rape, and hate crimes. Medical transition alone won't resolve the effects of crushing social oppression, social anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress. She says, "What we found is that treatment models which ignore the effect of cultural oppression and outright hate aren't enough. We need to understand that our treatment models must be responsive to not only gender dysphoria, but the effects of anti-trans hate as well. That's what improved care means." And, there are a lot of studies. I'm not even going to cite them. Just Google it. There are multiple studies now that prove that any kind of gender-affirming treatment, compliant with WPATH standards of cares, reduces dysphoria and improves mental health. That's just a fact. That study is misrepresented. The study itself is not necessarily wrong. It's just being misrepresented, and misrepresenting facts is something that anti-trans activists love to do.
It is move number one when facts are against you. And as we found in most cases with younger trans people who express that they are uncertain, it's generally from outside pressures, usually family, almost always parents, saying no, are you sure? This can't be right. Limiting access to social activities and such, just generally punishing their child for exploring their gender identity. And then at some point, they'll break. I mean, it's a child and their parents are bullying them at best, and will fall off of treatment for a while. And then after they hit an age where they can move away and they find a support circle who actually accepts them for the people that they are and not the imaginary version that parents have cooked up in their heads, they will usually resume whatever it was and dive right back into being who they are.
Yep. Most detransitioners, the vast majority of detransitioners, detransition because of external social forces applied to them. Their work, their loved ones. Yeah, they're told, even when people don't doubt your identity, they tell you this is too much. This is, a burden on us, right?
I'm losing my daughter is phrases that are very emotionally manipulative. It's also self-centered and terrible.
Yeah, holding a funeral for somebody that never really existed instead of celebrating the affirmation of somebody who's finally happy. Ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
It's horrific. It's child abuse is what it really is, but...
Oh, of course. But we can't say that. No. Because they accuse us of child abuse.
Oh, yes. We're the horrible monsters.
God forbid I care about trans children. God forbid I want trans children to become trans adults. So I've got some stats about Ohio and what they're doing with gender clinics, just to kind of contextualize some of this shit. This ridiculous bill that took up God knows how many hours of Ohio lawmaker time and energy and taxpayer money. In Ohio, their gender clinics have served only 3,300 trans patients under 18 in the last 10 years. And the average age of appointment is 16. And only 7% of that 3,300 patients were prescribed puberty blockers, and only 35% were prescribed hormones. That's an abysmally low number. Both of those numbers. Very low. So
like 30 children a year are getting puberty blockers, and this is enough to raise this much of a stink?
Yeah, almost nobody is even going to these clinics. And the people who do, very few of them are receiving this kind of medical intervention treatment. Which is very, very common. A lot of doctors will take kind of a wait and see approach. They might prescribe blockers if you're in serious distress or if you're experiencing precocious puberty. Blockers, by the way, completely safe. I don't even have to back that up with a source. Go Google it. Again, multiple studies. These are not new drugs. These are drugs that young people have been taking for decades. Cis children who have precocious puberty, your cousin who grew tits at 8 years old, and that was really fucking difficult for her and alarming, probably took puberty blockers, and she's fine, because you take them for a while, and then you stop taking them, and then the puberty happens again.
Are you telling me it's not a puberty stopper forever pill?
The everlasting puberty stopper from Willy Wonka? No.
If you steal one for Slugsworth, he'll give you $25,000.
I'd do that. I'd take that deal. So those stats are from Nick Lashutka, who is the president of the Ohio Children's Hospital Association. I've got some more stats relating to sports, the second half of this bill. In the last 8 years, only 19 trans girls have participated in girls' sports in Ohio. That's 10 in middle school, 9 in high school. Those are from the Ohio High School Athletic Association, their stats. The OHSAA, by the way, not a fan of this bill. They've had their own policies in place for trans competitors for many years now, I think 8 years, something like that. And it's been working for them fine. Their president said that it's fine and that they don't see the need for this bill. But it's getting, it's been forced through anyway, unsurprisingly.
Lawmakers will step in and try to make calls for doctors and sporting agencies and athletic commissions or whoever, because they think they know best.
As far as the bill goes, so I told you earlier what Governor DeWine said. His justification for those statements, right? He said that he visited 5 children's hospitals. He spoke to the families of trans children, and he said, and I quote, "They told me their child is alive only because of the care they received. These are gut-wrenching decisions that should be made by parents and should be informed by teams of doctors who are advising them. These are parents who have watched their children suffer for years." So he knows. He knew what was going on, and he said that he was going to veto the bill because he felt that the government should not be in charge of these decisions, that these decisions should rest with the parents of these children. Republicans didn't like that. They called him a tyrannical emperor for utilizing what are his completely legitimate powers of his office to veto a bill.
Unheard of. You never see a bill vetoed
Unheard
ever.
of. No, it doesn't happen. I don't think he's allowed to do that.
I'm going to call the president.
Wait a minute. So he acted all sanctimonious about HB 68, but guess what? He was drafting up his own anti-transgender legislation in the meantime. I don't know why he did this. Because he knew, factually, you've got your finger to the pulse of these things when you're involved. He knew he could veto that bill, but he knew that the state legislature would override it. 100% he knew that going into it. And yet at the same time, he passed an executive order that banned gender-affirming surgeries on minors. Again, really not happening. And he claimed at the time that the Ohio Department of Health and the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services would be drafting their own rules for gender-affirming care. And the most damning requirement in those bills would be, quote, comprehensive and lengthy mental health counseling prior to being considered for gender transition treatment. So again, people can't afford this shit. They don't have the time, the energy, or the money to go to therapy for years to sort out a problem they already know the solution to. If this was any other kind of medical problem, illness, condition, injury, we wouldn't be allowing them to put these kind of roadblocks up. But because it's about trans people and transitioning and medical care, it's a big political wedge issue that they can just destroy with these ridiculous requirements. DeWine's justification for this was that he wanted to combat what he called fly-by-night pop-up clinics that prescribe and diagnose without the proper care or time. And then somebody asked him if he had ever actually received a complaint about such a thing. And he said no. Never once.
Never happened.
But it
has
could
been
happen.
Completely invented. But God, imagine if it did.
But it could happen.
I'm trying to imagine a world where you go to a doctor and you say, I've been having some really dark thoughts lately. I think I might be depressed. I think there's something wrong with me. And the doctor goes, I don't know, let's talk about it for like 3 years, and then maybe we'll try some medicine. Like, can you imagine?
We might prescribe you an antidepressant in like 12 months, and you're going to have to come back for 24 visits. And also Medicaid doesn't cover those anymore. Eat shit, nerd! So the Senate overrode DeWine's veto 24-8, straight along party lines. Like I said, they returned a week early from their vacation to do this. They said, we've got to kill those trans children. Get back. I've been the Poconos, but I'm heading back. I've got a great quote here from Senator Christina Rogner. She's one of the bill's co-sponsors. And ahead of the vote, she said that it's impossible for someone to change their gender. She said, quote, there is no such thing as a gender spectrum. There is no such thing as gender-affirming care. You can't affirm something that doesn't exist. I don't think that's true. I'm very affirmed by fictional video games all the time.
I'm just reminded of the Metalocalypse quote in which one of the characters says he doesn't believe in Christianity as a concept. Not because he just thinks that it doesn't exist in general until someone points out a Bible and he says he has much to think about.
You know what? I agree with that take. As a Jewish woman, I'm on that guy's side.
Oh no! No one's ever shown me a gender, so I guess it can't be real.
I've never seen one. Senate Minority Leader Nikki Antonio, who's a Democrat, said that the legislation is likely to be challenged in court and argued the measure tells LGBTQ plus people, quote, that they are suspect and that they don't know what's best for themselves. I agree. I think that is going to be challenged in court. A lot of these bills get challenged in court.
Almost all of them do at this point, yeah.
Yeah, most of them, when they get passed, like immediately, the ACLU is like, hey, what's up? We're suing you.
Allow us to introduce ourselves.
And the Senate President, Matt Huffman, who's a Republican, agreed that the measure will probably be taken to court. But he said, quote, that the bill was passed with a presumption of constitutionality, which is just great. It's great to be able to presume that your shit's constitutional. God forbid you actually, I don't know, check. Yeah, I mean, even as recently as December, a federal judge ruled that an Idaho law banning gender-affirming care for minors was unenforceable, was unconstitutional, right? But fortunately, a lot of the time, these go to court, and before the merits of the bill are actually argued, the plaintiffs, you know, like the ACLU or whoever, will request injunctive relief, meaning essentially that the effects of the bill are null and void until it's deemed constitutional. So you can keep getting your medicine, so you can pursue medicine if you've never gotten it before, without this bill that's being argued in a higher court ruining your life. So that's pretty good. That usually happens. I would be surprised if that set of events does not happen with House Bill 68. And in fact, the ACLU has already announced that they're planning to challenge House Bill 68. Frida Levinson, the legal director at the ACLU of Ohio, said, quote, we are preparing litigation to defend transgender youth and their constitutional right to receive medically necessary health care. The use of gender-affirming hormone therapy to treat transgender minors is supported by every major medical association in our country. Transgender youth, together with their doctors and parents, should have access to evidence-based medical care just like anyone else. Families should be able to make these private, personal decisions based on the advice of their physicians and free from interference by politicians. House Bill 68 is not only cruel, it violates the Ohio Constitution and must be challenged. So that's really heartening from Frida. Like I said, this is pretty much how it goes. So yeah, we expect to see this challenged, hopefully overturned in the meantime. Hopefully relief is provided to the, I'm sure, many trans people in Ohio who deserve access to their medication. Okay, so that pretty much wraps what we've got on Ohio House Bill 68.
We've toured that one pretty thoroughly. That was a lot. That was a lot of Ohio.
That was so long. But that was the one I wanted to cover the most because it was in the news the most.
It was the biggest, really most visible.
Deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we do have 3 more bills to cover here, but we'll get through them fairly quickly because they're not quite as pernicious. They don't have as much going on. They just didn't make the news as much. It's hard to talk about something other people aren't talking about. So we've got Utah House Bills 257 and 261. 257 is sex-based designations for privacy, anti-bullying, and women's opportunities. I'm so glad they give these such succinct, good names.
Always for women's rights, all of these.
Always. Bill 261 is the Equal Opportunities Initiative. Now, 257 is kind of the bigger one. These bills were passed into law at the same time on January 30th, 2024. They were signed into law by Governor Spencer Cox. And so 257, House Bill 257, defines a legal standard for gender, and it's assigned by genitalia.
Of course.
And it imposes those standards on state facilities. So the bill, like a lot of bills, is a tremendously fucking boring list of terms and definitions, 53 pages of bullshit that essentially boils down to if you have a dick, you're a man, and if you have a pussy, you're a woman, and you're not allowed to change that. This applies specifically to government venues, but that includes public schools, courthouses, lots of places. And speaking of public schools, there is a provision that demands you have the right to work on a sort of privacy care program with your school so that if you are gender nonconforming in some capacity, you can go to the facilities that make the most sense to you when they are presumably unoccupied, right? So like maybe between classes rather than, or during a class rather than between classes, stuff like that. Still horseshit. And the thing is, if for some reason they decide that they can't do that, or they don't want to do that, they are supposed to, for example, if there's not a unisex single occupancy bathroom at your school, they have to take you to the public restrooms in what they call staggered scheduling, and that surely can't go wrong.
It's just ridiculous to think that you would have to sign in with the school office so you can go to the bathroom without being harassed.
Yeah, hope you don't need to piss for 8 hours.
Hope you don't have any kind of emergency that might require someone post-puberty to go to the bathroom very quickly. Those never happen.
I mean, I have IBS now, but I also had it when I was in school. Let me tell you, I made a lot of emergency trips to the bathroom during school. So there's a really weird exception carved out into this bill to those rules. If you are trans, you're still allowed to use public facilities in a government building, only if you have undergone SRS and have had your birth certificate and your ID updated to match your gender identity. There's no explanation for how they might verify that you've had your genitals reconfigured. Don't want to think about that.
We'll let the school system grapple with that one.
Well, of course, children in Utah cannot undergo any kind of gender-affirming surgery, so doesn't apply to them. Importantly, this applies to adults too.
Oh, good.
You and I have to use the men's restroom in any Utah government building.
Or else they'll stop and demand we drop trow in the hallway, I presume.
Show me your pussy.
Prove to me.
No, I'm not gonna do that. Show me what you got.
I would really rather not.
That's ridiculous, right? And especially considering birth certificate in a lot of states, for example, my birth state, Florida, you can't legally change your birth certificate anymore. It's not allowed. So there's literally no way. Even if I went and paid $50,000 out of pocket to get my Audi turned into an innie, I still couldn't go to the fucking bathroom in Utah. I'd have to try to use a urinal with my neo-pussy. Can you imagine?
The horrors.
I demand that you imagine.
I wish I didn't have to, but I'm currently imagining, and God, that urinal.
Okay, so they define the genders as if you're... They define the two genders. There's only two genders.
There's only two,
Can't
right?
change my mind because I'm a Utah House Bill. Female is, quote, an individual whose biological reproductive system is of the general type that functions in a way that could produce ova. And a male is, quote, an individual whose biological reproductive system is of the general type that functions to fertilize the ova of a female. I can't think of any way that those extremely narrow definitions could be used to harm even cis people. Hope you haven't had a fucking hysterectomy, ladies, or you're going to the men's.
Again, just proves that they have no idea how the body works, how anything within it is governed, and just to hope for the best as they throw darts at the dartboard.
Pretty much. Now, if you violate these, you're going to be hit with criminal penalties. If you use the, quote, wrong bathroom in a government-owned building, you could be charged with voyeurism and or criminal trespass, misdemeanors that could lead to up to 6 months in jail in Utah and a $1,000 fine. And a previous version of the bill would have levied those criminal penalties against children.
Boy, that's frustrating on so many levels. How many times have you been...
pass?
That's insane enough to me. How many times have you been in public?
We gotta put these kids.
How many times have you been in public? And someone has been waiting in line for the women's restroom because it'll be like 10 deep and the men's restroom is completely unoccupied. And they'll just be like, hey, I'm going to go over there real quick. They've got a toilet too. All of a sudden that would get you potentially fined if someone catches you and is feeling particularly petty about it. If they decide you don't look cis enough to them.
How many times have you seen a mother take her young son into the women's restroom? Because he's just a kid and it's not a big deal, right? Nobody else can watch the kid. She's got to take a piss. Go piss, girl. Well, sorry, you took your boy into the women's room. Now he's got to pay $1,000 fine. He's going to have to get into that child grinding machine. He needs his wages. He's got a fine to pay to the state of Utah. So House Bill 257 is going to be is the 13th law passed in the U.S. that limits trans people's rights to use certain facilities, according to LGBTQ research group Movement Advancement Project. So that's crazy. 13 of these, huh?
13, man.
13 states where you just can't go to the bathroom.
A lot of sessions going on with just nothing else to vote on, I guess.
People always ask me why I don't like to go out in public a ton. It's because I can't piss. I'll be killed.
I have to carry Mountain Dew bottles with me like I'm a gamer in 2006. It's terrible.
Which I do anyway, but now I have to carry the empty ones too.
Supply lines are getting longer and harder to maintain.
God. So,
this part's my favorite.
Utah State Representative Kira Birkeland described HB 257 as, quote, 100% unique and logical. Cool, thanks. And, quote, not copied from another state or organization, despite the fact that it essentially is identical to every other bathroom bill we've ever heard of. She claims that Utahns want, quote, more single occupancy accommodations, which I think is probably true. I don't know why this is the solution to that. I think that if people want more single occupancy accommodations, the answer might be in the architectural department. Consider building more single occupancy accommodations.
You're really burning down the house to deal with a spider in it with this one.
I know. I love single occupancy bathrooms. They're
great.
My favorite. Unisex single occupancy bathrooms are so great. There should be one for every American.
At least. Sometimes two, just in case you want to spread out a little bit.
Yeah. She says that she's received, quote, multiple reports of perpetrators going into women's facilities under the pretext of being something they are not, which she says is done, quote, at the expense of transgender individuals.
Oh, she's protecting us. Now I understand.
Yeah, she's a trans ally. I don't know if Kira Birkeland is actually a trans ally.
She loves us.
She doesn't want us to be badly represented by all these rapists who are claiming to be trans, going into the women's bathroom and sexually assaulting cis women. A thing that really happens all the time.
Yeah, let me just look up statistics how often that happens.
And it happens so often.
I can't find a single fucking instance. That's weird.
Shit. Well, what are we gonna do now? My favorite statement about this is from Trey Crowder in a video that he did years ago, where he asked a very simple question. He said, "How many times have you heard of that thing you're afraid of happening actually happening?" Hardly, not never.
Very firm, very concise.
Don't never happen.
It don't never not ever. It never happen. Never.
Does not never happen. And, importantly, trans students are at a much higher risk of sexual assault and other abuse when they can't use the bathroom they feel comfortable in. 36% of transgender and non-binary students report being the victim of assault in school bathrooms, as opposed to 15% of cisgender girls and just 4% of cisgender boys. Who's really at threat here? Who's at risk, right?
And like with all of these things, cutting back to pretending to be one thing to do another, nothing's stopping you from just being a man who walks into a women's restroom or vice versa. Like, there's no gender scanner at the door. And if you do that and do something horrific, you're still going to be arrested and charged with a crime.
Yes, claiming you're trans doesn't really help you do that. What you hear people say, if I wanted to go into a women's restroom and sexually assault a cis woman, I would just say I'm a cop. Yeah, so Governor Cox said about the bill, quote, "We want public facilities that are safe and accommodating for everyone, and this bill increases privacy protections for all. Thanks so much for the accommodation, Governor Cox."
Armed guards at every bathroom door.
They're trained to shoot, but only at the genitals.
Who? We're not sure yet. We're still working on what gender is exactly.
So moving swiftly along to the second part of Utah's horrible House bill party here. House Bill 261 is a removal of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. You've probably heard these called DEI programs or initiatives. They are used in a lot of states to provide anti-discrimination training in the workplace and at schools. They help provide resources for accessibility to marginalized workers and students. They just kind of make sure that everybody's being cool. If you're disabled, if you are not white, these are programs that are here to help ensure that you're being treated equitably, fairly. Ron DeSantis fucking hates DEI initiatives.
Ron DeSantis hates everything that isn't Ron DeSantis, so that doesn't surprise.
Curly-toed boots, lift-wearing motherfucker despises DEI initiatives. He and Greg Abbott, who is the lieutenant governor, I believe, of Texas, were some of the earliest Republicans to champion destroying DEI initiatives, which I think is really fucked up because Greg's in a fucking wheelchair.
He has directly benefited from these in the past, and now, of course...
Not a lot of discrimination in the governor's office, I guess.
He got one of those chairlifts somewhere, and he decided that's all that anyone would ever need.
Piece of shit. So House Bill 261 would make it illegal for DEI initiatives to make, quote, ideological commitment statements that promote political ideologies. They would replace the DEI initiatives with, at least at schools, with what they call student success centers, which is just a fucking meaningless fluff idea to make it look like they give a shit, which they don't, because their whole shtick is they're kind of pretending that they want to unite people. They keep saying they want to unite people instead of dividing them. They say that DEI initiatives are dividing people by, I guess, acknowledging that marginalization exists at all, presently or historically.
There's this idea that somehow by pointing out that things have been bad in the past, that somehow there's just no way to get around that, and it's just going to be a black mark forever, and we're always going to be separated down these lines, when the most important part of healing is to recognize that the pain has been caused, and then move forward from it.
Yes, and talk about how we can be better, and do better, and be good to each other. These kinds of programs are fantastic. It is so important, because, you and I grew up in places in the South that you might refer to as racially isolated.
Yes.
Right? I knew less than 10 black people. I knew maybe a dozen people from Latin America and Mexico. Mm-hmm. One Chinese person in my entire school, in high school. And that's it. Everybody else was white. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of white people. I didn't know a lot of non-white people growing up. I had to grow up and I had to sort of deprogram myself from the weird, shitty, racist, microaggression type things that you are taught growing up in these sort of, isolated places. And these kinds of initiatives, especially in states where that kind of racial isolation is really common, are just invaluable to ensuring that people like you and I, white people who maybe didn't grow up with a lot of experience with other cultures, aren't just hurting other people senselessly.
And it's so much easier to learn these things early on, too. Like, having to adjust later in life takes so much longer than if you're a kid and things are just presented to you as they are, as being normal, that you should just treat everyone the same. Here's some things that you might encounter. Instead, having to deprogram that 20 years later is just a monumental effort for some people.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something you have to work out, like, basically your whole life moving forward.
Yeah,
you know?
Just because you didn't have a chance and you weren't taught early in life. It's removing programs like this, I just can't understand. I mean, I can understand.
It's so miserable. Oh, right, yeah. Well, it's the racism.
That's right.
Actually, the thing that's happening is they're doing the racism.
I keep forgetting racism exists. My bad.
Whoops. See, if we had had DEI initiatives growing up. So Governor Spencer Cox, I shit you not, wrote a 5,000-word Substack essay about why he hates DEI and why it was a good decision to kill it in the state of Utah. This script that we've been talking about for over an hour now was 3,300 words.
It's a lot.
Spencer wrote 5,000.
It's a lot.
On his Substack. What are you, a fucking YouTuber? What you're on? Why does Governor Cox have a Substack? And the way he defended this move was saying, well, Utah is gutting DEI, but we're providing alternatives. I assume he means the Student Success
Center, whereas schools are normally student failure centers.
Right, where you go to the Student Success Center and they say, it's okay to be white, and you're like, yay!
And then everybody
proceed with your day whitely. He compared himself and anybody else who's against DEI to Martin Luther King Jr. He said, because they want people to be judged by, famously, the content of their character, not the color of their skin. Like as if Dr. King didn't know what fucking equity was, or as if he never spoke about the fact that Black Americans had been oppressed in America for centuries.
Oh my God. That's literally a joke from King of the Hill. Where Hank's like, why can't I hate a man regardless of the color of his skin? It's like, you're quoting Hank Hill. Stop it.
Yeah, I'm sure Martin Luther King Jr. would fucking love you, Spencer Cox.
Oh, yeah. Best buddies.
God. Eat shit and go to hell. Anyway, moving on to Tennessee House Bill 878, introduced in the Senate as Senate Bill 596 on January 25th of 2023, and it was introduced in the House as House Bill 878 on January 30th, 2023. In Tennessee, often identical bills will be submitted to the House and the Senate simultaneously. They call them companion bills. And they go through the bill to law process kind of at the same time. So they'll bounce back and forth from, one section of the state legislature to another. They'll go through committees and changes made will be reflected in both bills. It's a weird process, but that's how they do it. And it was signed into law by Governor Bill Lee on February 21st, 2024. So just last month, not that long ago, but signed into law. Now, what House Bill 878 does, and this is a fucking weird one. This is impressive almost in its naked bigotry. It's an amendment to Tennessee Code. And it says, a person shall not be required to solemnize a marriage if the person has an objection to solemnizing the marriage based on the person's conscience or religious beliefs. Now, in Tennessee, solemnizing a marriage is just essentially affirming it as somebody with the authority to do so. So what this essentially means is that now, you remember Kim Davis.
The one who championed that she did not want to recognize a gay marriage because of her religious beliefs, yes.
She was a county clerk, and now county clerks in Tennessee can tell you no if they think you're a little too gay.
Oh, boy.
So what we're looking at now is there's no marriage equality in Tennessee.
Which I'm sure stands up at a federal level.
Well, that's kind of the idea, right?
Uh-oh.
So Camilla Taylor, the Deputy Legal Director for Litigation for Lambda Legal, described the bill as patently unconstitutional. And she said, quote, public officials don't get to assume public office and then pick and choose which members of the public to serve. Camilla, you're right, but also they just do that.
They're doing it anyway, unfortunately.
They just do that.
Laws are more vague suggestions, really.
Like roads. The state representative Monty Fritz is the sponsor of the bill, And he defended it by saying it would give officiants in the state of Tennessee the right to refuse to solemnize marriage for, quote, reasons of conscience or other religious beliefs. He told the state subcommittee on children and family affairs, quote, as societal views change about what constitutes a marriage, officiants must be able to refuse to solemnize marriages that are contrary to their beliefs. The government has a responsibility to protect the exercise of religious beliefs. That's weird.
It is weirdly phrased, yeah.
He went on to say, those with the authority to perform civil ceremonies would also be permitted to refuse to solemnize marriage for reasons of conscience. So yeah, I mean, the language of the bill doesn't say that they can deny your marriage if they think you're a homo.
Ooh, a little wide, huh?
It says, yeah, any issue of conscience or religion, right? So they could deny a marriage for pretty much any reason. Like, for example, if you are white and your spouse is not, and they don't think that miscegenation should be a thing. Busting out the old-timey bigotry words there.
Phrases you haven't heard since the 1800s.
Imagine me. I'm standing at the county clerk. I'm a county clerk. I bust out my old-timey calipers. I'm coming for your skull. Why would they pass a bill that's clearly lawsuit bait? Are they stupid?
No, I'm sure they want to push it up to the courts and get it into a very sympathetic Supreme Court case.
Exactly. They want to run it up the flagpole. They want to get it to the Supreme Court, which is, of course, in dire straits right now. They want to use it to challenge Obergefell v. Hodges. They want to try to repeal federal equality of marriage using this bill, which is why, I'm assuming why, looking around, I can't find anybody who has said that they actually have plans to legally challenge this bill. It's a really ridiculous situation where any group that challenges this bill knows that there is a chance that this is going to go all the way to the Supreme Court, and that the Supreme Court, given its current aggressively conservative and completely bought and paid for makeup, could then make same-sex marriage once again illegal in America.
It's a dangerous game to have to play, though.
I don't know legal politics quite well enough to tell you exactly what's going to happen there, but I can tell you this bill is fucking atrocious. And I am ashamed daily and nightly to come from the miserable state of Tennessee.
The only thing I can say about Missouri is at least they're not setting up bills like this to hold marriage hostage in the state until someone takes it up to the Supreme Court.
You gotta wonder if it's a matter of time. Missouri sucks quite a lot.
It does a lot. They do hate all things good there, as far as the legal level goes, so cutting off the nose to spite the face would be the move.
Used to be a state that declared war against Mormonism. What happened?
Unfortunately...
You've fallen from grace, Missouri.
Unfortunately, the Mormons founded Mormon Las Vegas of Branson, Missouri, and that kind of changed the perspective that Missourians have on Mormon people.
That's so crazy, isn't it? They went from, like, Mormons, it's on fucking sight, to, you know what? We're all right with you. Thank God that concludes our summary of the anti-LGBTQ bills that have passed in America to date in 2024. I'll go ahead and tell you, blanket statement, there's a lot of this stuff going on all the time. We might get things wrong. We might forget things. Always feel free to write in, hit us up on Twitter, email WhatTheTrans. If we've made a mistake, we would love to make a correction. So don't be afraid to do that.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, it's very easy to do because most of these bills, as that one lovely representative mentioned, are quote-unquote totally original, but in fact are mostly written by committee, by a couple of very specific groups.
Anti-trans organizations, yeah. We saw this with, Fred Deutsch, I think his name is. Mm-hmm. You remember him, South Carolina, I think?
Yeah.
That was a big thing with all his emails that were leaked. And yeah, we know these people are colluding. These big anti-trans organizations and activists are working with Republican lawmakers to draft these bills. So a lot of them look very similar and they kind of go all the same way. And that's by design. That's not a mistake. We've covered all of our bills, generally speaking. So what we're going to take you to up next, as we teased at the start of the show, is a little interview with our beloved friend Evan Urquhart, who is the founder of Assigned Media, who spearheaded and organized and created the Trans Data Library that we wrote for. He's going to talk to me about WPATH forum posts little tease. There's one in particular that is shocking, awing, disgusting, fucked up, weird, and I cannot wait for you to hear it. Let me know if you have any theories. I'm curious.
For the sake of my own sanity, I hope that the strange and horrifying one is a fabrication. But in my heart of hearts,
it's true.
I know there's someone out there doing some shit like this. So
not only do you know that it's true, you know that he's not the only
I know one. There's got to be more than one. Oh, my brain, it hurt.
Thoroughly teased. So
let's cut from you to you.
I will introduce you. You are Evan Urquhart, the illustrious owner and operator of Assigned Media, which is a really cool little indie queer news kind of vibe. We love that. I write for you. It's awesome.
That sounds about right. That's me.
Yeah, that is you. And so what we want to talk about is this extremely scandalous trove of evil forum posts from an organization known as the, World Professional Association for Transgender Health?
Yes, WPATH.
Yeah, our paternalistic mommies and daddies in the Endocrine Society all across the world who tell us exactly how we may or may not transition medically and have only our best interests at heart.
And we're also thankful that they do. And it's really shocking. We found out this week that they have a forum and people post on it.
That's so scary.
Yeah, no, a group, it was thankfully exposed by a group called Environmental Progress that mostly advocates in favor of industry and against worrying too much about climate change. But they thought it was just really important that people understand that WPATH is, the professional, kind of standard setting body for transgender healthcare, and that they have a forum, and that, at times people who are members of WPATH post on a forum. It's really just blowing this whole, this whole scam of gender affirming healthcare completely out of the water. Because now that people know they have a forum and they post on it,
it's over.
I'm not sure. What?
Yeah, it's over for. Yeah, no. So I mean, the actual through line here is, I believe you said that your executive summary of the issue was that doctors are posting on a forum for doctors, and there's nothing there really.
Yeah. So to go back a little bit, this kind of hit with a great fanfare. It seemed a little bit similar to the, some of the so-called whistleblowers that have come out. It was kind of really hyped as being a big deal.
A little Jamie Reed action.
Yeah. And so even though, I'm pretty used to misinformation and propaganda being, usually what is going on, what I decided to do for my site was just ignore the 66 pages of framing that was in this WPATH files full report and just go straight to the 140 pages of forum posts and just kind of read all of them and attempt to analyze them kind of free of anyone else's sort of opinion. And I absolutely went into it thinking there might be something juicy or interesting.
I would be very concerned if there were like some really blatant posts on the forum that were like making it, people doctors sharing the names of their patients and stuff. I mean, that would be unbelievable. And that's kind of like my thought on it too is, they share this big trove of emails and they're like, look at what the evil doctors, it's like, if they're doing bad things, I want to know too. Like, I'm not really in WPATH's corner, broadly speaking. Like, some of their standards of care are good and correct. Some of their stuff is a little bit, like I said, paternalistic. Some of the people in that organization do not seem to have our best interests at heart. So yeah, if they were up to something nefarious, I'd love to know about that.
This is sort of the first thing that I think seems so obvious to us as trans people is that, we want our doctors to be ethical. We certainly want our medical care to be effective. We would be the first people to want to know and to care and to be furious if, behind the scenes, WPATH was hiding, for example, hiding the fact that hormone therapy causes cancer, or hiding the fact that, which is actually true, so hormone therapy does not, as far as we can tell, cause liver cancer. There was just someone who posted about a patient who had some, kind of benign liver tumors that are kind of actually more linked to birth control than to testosterone, but had been advised by that person's doctor to go off of both birth control and testosterone, and they were sort of asking their professional colleagues for advice about that. And the reply was a friend/colleague a while back who had cancer diagnosed, and it was so far advanced, he opted for palliative care and died, and I think it was the testosterone. And this was just some rando. We don't know what this person's qualifications were. We don't know if this person was a doctor. It clearly wasn't even their patient, and this was kind of presented as proof that WPATH knows that testosterone causes cancer, which, there are studies for that. You don't need
to. I think if I remember right, I did that an interview for New Now Next years ago with Dr. Joshua Safer, who is also a WPATH member, of course. I think he worked on the most recent standards of care, and his take at the time was essentially that, from what they understand and what evidence they have, that there's very little, health risk going into these treatments, and that long term he expected to find either very minimal risk or none at all. And I assume that's still the case. I mean, I haven't seen any big studies come out. This is certainly a field of medicine where we would love to see more studies, and we don't get a lot of them right now, especially with how polarized, the political environment is for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Something you mentioned too about we don't know who's posting this stuff. You wrote about that in your article for Assigned Media about this, that all you have to do to get access to this forum is pay $225. You don't have to be a doctor with a medical degree or a license or anything. You can just pay money and walk right in.
Well, and in fact, even to just be a full voting member, you don't have to be a doctor, because, and it's good. They also have therapists, they have social workers, they have, I think, voice, speech professionals, really anyone who would be involved in patient care can be a member. So I think one of the sort of, I was going to call it a misconception, but I think it is more accurate to call it a lie, or at least one of the things is that a lot of the right-wing stories have presented all of these posts as having been from doctors, and that's just not accurate. Even if it wasn't the case that anyone could just have signed up for a membership, and the person who leaked, as far as we know, could be some of the people who, some of these posts. There's no reason to think that they are. And the fact that the posts are so boring, honestly, to me suggests that that's actually less likely. But there's no reason to know that it's not just the leaker sharing their own posts and saying this is damning, because that's how little we know about this. I did count, and I said 340 forum posts, kind of ranging from, like, any forum, like there's an exactly or a yes, or there's like someone who wrote, 2,000 words of like tightly reasoned, commentary about a sort of thing. I couldn't get an exact count. I think I was at like 342 or something, but because there was a little bit of repetition, there was a little bit of things that were cut and came in the middle, and it was just a little bit hard to stitch them together. 340 forum posts was my estimate. I couldn't be exact.
Yeah, and that's another interesting thing about this to me is that, it's 2024. I use a program called Lightshot when I need to take screenshots, but I think there's like a snipping tool on your computer to take screenshots of your screen.
I use it all the time.
Yeah, and what we got was not that. It was like physical pictures of printouts or scans of printed paper copies of these forum posts.
Yeah, there were things that looked like screenshots, but not a normal screenshot, more like maybe someone used their phone to take a picture of the computer screen. And there were things that looked like printouts, and the printouts often had kind of highlighted and underlined stuff that maybe whoever was doing this highlighting thought was particularly damning. Although often I just kind of didn't agree with their assessment, I guess, let's say. And you know, the theory, I would say, although of course we can't know what the person's motives was, is that they were just trying to make it look like the Pentagon Papers. They were trying to make it look like this sort of illicit material that they'd smuggled out of something, when really it's just a forum that if you have $25, you can access it, and then you could just take a screenshot like a normal person if you weren't an anti-trans weirdo.
Just doing normal things on the WPATH forums.
Like printing it out and highlighting it like one does.
Yeah. There's so many options to get, like, if, you know, and that's, if this were like this big damning thing, you would really want as clear and concise pictures as you could possibly get. And instead we've got these kind of like, you know, boomery Facebook meme looking printout things. It's all very strange. Do you think that was the goal, was to make it specifically look like some kind of like, yeah, I mean, like you mentioned the Pentagon Papers, to look like some kind of nefarious smuggled documents? I
think that was the goal. I mean, again, I can't know what goes on in these people's heads, but, you know, to me, what makes the most sense is that just like doing screenshots of forum posts would have been too clear that it was nothing, so they had to make it look a little more like it was something. You know, I want to give some more examples. So, you know, I think as trans people, we sort of know that we take medications and those medications have side effects. But one of the favorite approaches of these, you know, sort of propagandists is to act as if they've discovered that there are side effects. So there was, you know, a section where, you know, some doctors discussed the best estrogen creams for, you know, vaginal dryness, you know, for men, trans guys on testosterone, which is just, you know, it's ludicrous to think that this would be some hidden thing that no one, that would be like a scandal, that if people knew there was, you know, vaginal dryness and atrophy, and, you know, sometimes it can get more serious than that. I don't want to sort of make light of, you know, this side effect, but it isn't something that sort of is being exposed just now.
Yeah. It's a known entity. I mean, and that's what's funny about, they talk about informed consent, and I don't think they really understand what that looks like. You know, when you go into any informed consent clinic in America, you get a little printout. I don't know what that looks like for trans men. For me, that was like 2 pages that was like, hey, you might grow tits and your dick might get small. Is that a problem? And then you say, no, not really. And they give you the pills, right? Depending on the clinic. But so, you know, they make these potential side effects known to you know, like a big one with estrogen. They talk about risk of deep vein thrombosis, which in my non-medical opinion is very overblown to begin with, but it's a thing they make you aware of.
Right. For testosterone, they sort of want to make you aware of, and this is another thing that sometimes will happen with these kind of anti-trans propaganda outlets, is that they'll make the wanted side effects sound as much like unwanted side effects as the unwanted ones. So they'll say something like permanent voice deepening for testosterone. It's like, yeah, that's what we're going for.
No.
You know, but, you know, yeah, that's what the informed consent process. And, you know, I think certainly as doing a podcast for members of the community, I think there is really room to say that the informed consent process could be better. And, you know, doctors or nurse practitioners or whoever is giving this care taking more time to like go through the different side effects and talk with patients and make sure patients understand, I think would be, you know, a positive thing that I want to encourage. But it is a process where we all know that there are side effects. We all know that, you know, for any medication, you could just be allergic to it. Like there's just, it's anti-trans people can't get it into their heads that this is medical care. And so it's similar to other, things where, you have a condition and there are some side effects and you kind of decide if the side effects are worth treating the condition. Well, it's interesting when you listen to some of these detransitioners, it almost sounds like they thought they were going to be turned into a cis person, which if that's the case, like if they really thought that they were going to be indistinguishable from a cis person, then like, I guess I feel sorry for them, but like that is certainly not what I
wish
I was right. Of course, we all wish, but we kind of go into it understanding that the treatments do certain things and they don't do other things, and it's it's not a big secret that you don't grow an actual dick when you take testosterone, or that your chromosomes don't change. Like that's just not. Yeah, I don't know.
Wait, my chromosomes don't change? What the hell?
I didn't say anything. Your chromosomes are beautiful. They're fine. They're great.
Thank you. Thank you.
They're so feminine.
Nobody ever compliments my feminine chromosomes. Oh goodness. There's just so much that these people don't understand about like what we go through and what we're looking into, and what we want out of transition. And let me just segue into what some people want out of their transition that I don't understand. I don't know what's happening here. So I'll read this post, like some minor preliminary information for anybody who doesn't, anybody who's blessed enough to not know what autogynephilia or who Ray Blanchard is essentially this ridiculous, he's a sexologist broadly enemies of the trans community, in my opinion. Weird little guys obsessed with dick cuffs they put on your dick to see if you get turned on when you look at porn. They're weird guys. They are weird guys, and I don't trust them. But Ray Blanchard is sort of like the prototypical evil sexologist who, in I think the 80s or 90s, I wrote an article about this. I should know exactly when, but I don't remember. Came up with the idea of autogynephilia, which is sort of broadly just this idea that there are trans women who are actually just gay men, and there are trans women who are actually just sexually attracted to the idea of themselves as women, which is also, I might add, just a thing that women generally are. Most women with like a healthy libido and like concept of sexuality are, in some way, shape or form attracted to themselves or the idea of having sex as women. This is super normal shit that Ray Blanchard has pathologized needlessly. And so one of these posts on the forums were from somebody, some sort of doctor who said, and I'll quote them here, they said, they opened by saying that they don't ascribe to Blanchard's, quote, debunked concepts related to gender dysphoria. However, they say, I have a patient who identifies solely as a heterosexual male with autogynephilia. This person has been taking hormones off and on for 15 years, admittedly takes them for about 9 weeks at a time while withholding sexual gratification, will sexually gratify himself after 9 weeks of taking hormones, and will then have clarity about his perversion. Those are in quotes. During those 9 weeks, this person will seek out anti-trans activists and anti-gay activists to have meetings as a form of self-punishment. And once they've stopped hormones, they immediately begin the process of planning to restart again, in secret as a form of eroticism. The patient is admittedly staunchly conservative and religious, and here's the really important part, and is a part of legislative bodies that work with, quote, anti-grooming groups in an attempt to detrans children. So what we've got...
we've got a nasty little freak.
A nasty little freak who is fucking around with hormones, edging themselves for 9 weeks at a time, and seeking out self-harm through, meeting with other...
I mean, I hope the orgasms are really good, dude. Like,
I mean, they must be. That must be a powerful nut.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there's... It's no way. I can't imagine. And then the end is really fascinating, that this is a person who could potentially be a Republican politician, could be your fucking senator, could be who knows?
It's a little unclear. It does sound like maybe I could just be a staffer. It could be, it's a little hard to say, but someone who is involved in anti-trans politics who gets off on the idea of medical transition, gets off on taking estrogen, and attempts to apparently make it illegal for the rest of us who, if we're nasty little freaks, it is not part of our medical transition in this way. I mean, you want to say takes all types in this world. I just, the part about interaction with anti-trans groups and their being part of a legislative body or something like that is the really freaky, really nasty little shit.
There's no way this person is happy. This person is not happy in their day-to-day life. This is a cycle of abuse, really. Yeah, of self-abuse. And it's just sad to think that this person even exists and is doing this, even aside from how scary it is that they're out there trying to take away our rights to the medication we need. Yeah. And it makes you wonder, like, are there more of them? Does this person have like a group, Could there be a group chat?
I wish that had been what had been exposed. This is by far the most interesting thing in the entire WPATH files. Yeah, and it is certainly mostly an expose of how nasty and freakish conservatives can be. Can you imagine if they came out and they were like, I hit rock bottom when I saw my case history discussed on the WPATH files, and now I want to come out and, describe who I really am. I guess we'd embrace her. I guess we'd embrace her. We'd have to.
Yeah. I heard Alyssa and Evan talking about me on What the Trans.
If you're listening, please reach out. I will be so compassionate. I won't make fun of you at all. We'll tell your story. We'll put it on assigned media. We welcome you and your nasty freakishness, as all of us have. No judgment.
Oh, look,
except for your conservative politics.
And I'll ask you if you have any other thoughts here. But first, I do have something that was shared with us with What the Trans. And Alex tweeted about this already, but I'll just repeat it here. Alex received a screenshot of a statement, a post on those forums made by Blaine Vella, who is a WPATH executive director. And it's about a party line statement that Marcy Bowers, as the president of WPATH, is putting out there. So the official statement,
kind of a weird statement, if I remember.
Yeah, it's a little bit. There's at least one line in there that's a little bit weird. So Marcy Bowers is telling everybody, if you're asked by the press about this leak, we have this one statement to make, and here it is. Marcy Bowers says, WPATH is and has always been a science and evidence-based organization whose recommendations are widely endorsed by major medical organizations around the world. We are the professionals who best know the medical needs of trans and gender diverse individuals and stand opposed to individuals who misrepresent and delegitimize the diverse identities and complex needs of this population through scare tactics. The world is not flat. Gender, like genitalia, is represented by diversity. The small percentage of the population that is trans or gender diverse deserves health care and will never be a threat to the global gender binary. So that's what Marcy's telling us.
Goodness knows, we wouldn't want to be a threat to the global gender binary.
I have a few thoughts. I have a few thoughts. First of all, I am a threat to the global gender binary. You can write that down. Anybody listening, take it as a headline. I am a threat. Me, Alyssa Steinzik. I'm a threat to the global gender binary. I'm coming for it. Which is funny because I technically belong to the gender binary.
Yeah, I'm agnostic towards the global gender binary. I feel that if someone wants to replace the global gender binary with something, a new genderless utopia, I'm all for it, but I am certainly not someone who is sort of actively working to threaten it. At least not in my day-to-day life. What I do in the privacy of my own bedroom.
I do think I think our very existence might threaten.
It might.
The global gender binary. This is, a big thing we talk about.
Marcy Bowers is the expert, though. She says we're not threatening it.
This is true. She does.
Sure,
yeah,
she would know better than us.
She's the professional who best knows the medical needs. What was I talking about? The paternalism? This is
right.
I'm just saying, and also I will say that this is that kind of attitude is not new from Marcy Bowers, who is a bit well known in the trans femme community, at least, for being just kind of a bull. You know, she's very aggressive about all of this. She takes her job very seriously, and a lot of the time that's really cool. I know somebody who had SRS done by Marcy Bowers, who Marcy, like, I think came to her house and like drove her to a follow-up appointment. Like, you know, I don't ever want to say that there aren't great people in WPATH, certainly. Like, you know, Dr. Safer, I have only talked to him once, but he was really cool.
Yeah, I really like Dr. Safer.
Yeah, really decent guy. And I think there are a lot of those people in WPATH. I will say I am concerned that Marcy says the world is not flat. We are now confirmed WPATH are globe heads.
I mean,
they don't believe in the truth of a flat earth. She has this weird line too. Genitalia is represented by diversity. I mean, certainly that is true in the strictest sense. It's just a strange sentence. It's a weird thing to say, I feel. Yeah. I don't know. You know, maybe she just wrote this off the cuff, right?
You would think that if you're writing an official, but I mean, you know, who among us hasn't botched an official statement from time to time?
Oh God, yeah. What is your official party line with assigned media being never no typos?
Never no typos. That's my motto for my social media accounts is never no typos. Also in my, as you know, having sometimes had to fix typos that I introduce into your drafts, it's just not an area of strength for me to avoid typos.
This whole thing, we've been going for like half an hour now.
Yep.
I don't really have anything else to talk about.
Yeah, we should do some sort of wrap up.
If you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah. So if you have any kind of ambition to be a journalist, just understand there will come a time when you have to read hundreds and hundreds of forum posts. And if that sounds really boring to you, it is. There are, I would say, supposedly other benefits to the profession. But
it's not money
every bit as awful.
Or prestige. People will hate you. Everybody you encounter, nobody takes you seriously. But there are probably some benefits in there. I don't know, sort of a sense of righteousness, maybe, if you're a good journalist.
You don't have to go out in the weather a lot. Very few injuries.
Yeah. Well, unless you're a traveling journalist. Now,
don't be a war correspondent, I guess, if you.
Yeah, or even just being an investigative reporter and like traveling, you know, into other places in the country, I would get so exhausted. But yeah, the research is a big thing, you know, because when you're a journalist, you kind of want to say things that are true, which usually involves finding, you know, multiple, if you can, sources on any factual statement you're making. Writing the script this week, which 3,300 fucking words. I don't know if I'll get that down in the intervening episodes, maybe. You know, this was my first draft at it, but I had to read four bills because, you know, and I, based on the placement of this interview with you, I assume our listeners have already heard me talk about them, but I've gone over 4 different bills that have passed this year that are anti-LGBTQ or anti-trans. And as I'm sure you know, I'm sure you've had to do the same thing before. Reading House bills or Senate bills is so dull.
It's deadly. They've got the definitions. They've got
And yeah, they stop every paragraph to be like, you know, in this sentence, the definition of this is this. And it's like, it's good. You know, you want clarity in your laws, certainly. But oh my God, having to read them. I'm glad that's not like my full-time beat or anything, reading legalese. You know, there are legal scholars and journalists who focus entirely on legislative stuff. I couldn't handle it. Too much required reading. It's right back to college, and I did not do well there. But yeah, so I don't have anything else about this. Well, so I'm so excited.
Hollow. I think this is going to be on your inaugural episode of the US version of the incredible What the Trans podcast. So thank you so much for having me on. Hope to do this again very soon. And
absolutely,
yeah, I'll be listening, and I hope the launch goes well.
Yes, thank you. And also, if you're listening, go subscribe to Assigned Media on Twitter and Blue Sky and all that. I mean, we are definitely the best news outlet in the world.
Easily.
Period.
I would say in the world. Yes, yes. That's accurate. Couple sources,
if you want to contribute.
Verified.
Oh, yeah. I think that's enough for a plurality opinion kind of deal. And if you do a little donation to Assigned Media, you get a weekly column from Evan that's probably really good. I haven't read it. I'm sorry.
And if you do that also, you will be supporting the weekly column of Alyssa on Fridays, which is we call it This Week in Barrel Scraping. It's kind of the fun column. It's the fun day on Assigned Media, Trans Daily news site. So, every donation also goes to Alyssa a little bit as well.
Yeah, funding independent trans journalism. Such an important thing. You should do it.
You should.
Thank you for talking to me about this, Evan.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Golly, that was messed up.
Wow.
Thanks so much again for talking to us about that, Evan. We're going to see Evan pretty frequently on the podcast, I think. Evan is a longtime talented journalist. He's been writing for Slate for years. And he has a lot of contacts, a lot of friends. He's a damn good interviewer. So we're going to bring in Evan on pretty often when we need interviews done, when we want to talk to him about something that he's knowledgeable about. He's kind of the unofficial third host going on here. So you'll be hearing from him whenever we can get him, basically.
Hopefully as often as possible, but he is a busy man. So
okay, so we got two things to go over before we wrap up here. And the first thing is what we're going to talk about in 2 weeks on episode 2. So we are a bi-weekly podcast, the US edition, just like the UK edition. So next week you're going to hear from Alex and Ash, their lovely dulcet tones about whatever's going on across the pond in that strange place we call Britain.
Do we call it that, or is that just you?
Yeah, that might just be me. You got a good point.
Fair enough.
What we're going to talk about in episode 2, 2 weeks from now, Monday, if you're listening on Monday, possibly sooner or in the past. We're going to talk about Nex Benedict. Now, if you're trans, even if you're not, if you give a shit about trans people, you've probably heard about Nex Benedict. And I want to preface, I'm going to give you a little summary of what's happened regarding Nex Benedict. But to preface, I want to say that according to an NBC Out report on February 25th, Nex, and according to Nex's friends, Nex used he, him pronouns and identified as transgender. Now, from what we understand, Nex at home with his lovely mother, Sue Benedict, was using they, them pronouns. But we're going to use he, him pronouns because that seems to be what everybody who was, all of Nex's friends in his day-to-day life used to identify him. So Nex Benedict was a 16-year-old student at Owasso High School, which is near Tulsa, Oklahoma. And he was involved in a fight in the restroom at that high school on February 7th of this year. It was more of an ambush, really, right? Attacked by 3 other students, hurt quite badly, taken to the hospital by his grandmother and adoptive mother, Sue Benedict, who said that he was bullied by other students because of his gender identity for more than a year. Taken to the hospital, talked to a school resource officer, a police officer stationed at the school, filed a report about the fight, and was then taken home, discharged from the hospital, seemed to think everything was okay. And unfortunately, tragically, the very next day, February 8th, Nex Benedict collapsed and passed away in his home. We're currently waiting on the final results of his autopsy and his toxicology report. We don't know when we're going to hear from those. Sometimes they take weeks. These things get backed up a lot. It seems like a lot of pressure from the Department of Education to make this happen on a swifter timeline, probably because of the national attention that Nex's death is getting. So we hope to know maybe a little bit more in a couple weeks. But regardless, in episode 2, we're going to devote all of our runtime to Nex, talking about Nex, everything we know about Nex, and the incident that led to his absolutely fucking tragic death.
And we had discussed trying to add it to this episode. Of course, we've run along just talking about how long the other bills were and trying to catch up to things that have happened throughout the year before the podcast even began. But unfortunately, with how few concrete details have been released, it just didn't seem right to jump in and speculate and spend, a couple of weeks waiting for something to come out. We just decided to put it off. In 2 weeks, hopefully we'll have more concrete answers, and it'll be a little easier to go about. And of course, we don't just want to talk about the misfortune and horror of death and more.
Absolutely.
Celebrate a life a little bit, because that obviously doesn't happen much in the news cycle whenever a young transgender person dies.
I've also done a little reporting on NEX and Owasso High School in general, which from the sounds of it is not a great place, but I'll tell you, it sounds a lot like where I went to high school.
Probably wouldn't be that different from mine.
Yeah, very familiar going through some of the stories I've heard about racism, transphobia, homophobia, any number of things. So that's going to be next episode. It's going to be pretty heavy, probably, but, Next Benedict deserves to be talked about. People who die under these circumstances for what has now been deemed the social crime of being gender divergent in any capacity deserve to have their story told. I don't want Next to fall out of the media cycle. I don't want people to forget. We don't exactly command a legion of viewers and listeners, but we can do our part. We can talk about them.
Everything we can.
Anyway, moving on to our last segment. Something we're going to try to do every episode because, the topic of this podcast is generally heavy, even if it's not as heavy as Next Benedict. So what we want to try to do at the end of every podcast is a little bit of trans joy. Sometimes that's easy. Sometimes that's hard. This week we want to talk about, because we talked about these anti-LGBTQ bills, we want to talk about the fact that the situation sucks, but it's not as dire as you might think at first glance.
No, it is a numbers game in a lot of ways. And numbers-wise, we're not doing that bad. I know it seems bad.
It seems bad, and any of these bills passing is a fucking travesty. But like I said before, we've got 476 now anti-LGBTQ bills have been passed, or introduced, I should say, in the US in 2024 alone. And it's upsetting, but only 6 of those have passed. They're being challenged. 71 have been defeated. When these bills do pass, they're challenged in court by human rights groups. Like I talked about earlier, injunctive relief is usually provided. There's a long way to go when these bills get introduced most of the time. Some of them take over a year. Most of these bills that we talked about took a very long time. None of those were introduced this year, except for, I think, was Tennessee House Bill 878 was?
Yes, January 25th.
The other 3, I think, were introduced last year. So These take a lot of time. They often don't make it. They die in committees and on the floor, even in Republican states. We also, thanks to the Campaign for Southern Equality, we know that multiple pro-LGBTQ bills have been passed in Virginia. HB202, which requires the state administrative forms in Virginia to include a non-binary gender option. HB536 is an anti-bullying bill that includes protections for LGBTQ students. HB571 is essentially a preventative bill to stop the don't say gay policies in Florida from being enacted in Virginia. So there are good people fighting this shit every day. In 2023, 510 anti-LGBTQ bills were introduced in the US. 214 of them were defeated in that year. 84 of them passed into law, but a lot of those are being challenged in court. A lot of them are still moving through state legislature. Many of them will not pass. This wave of bigoted hate from lawmakers all across America is undeniable, and it's scary as hell. But it's really important to remember that there are just so many good people fighting very hard against this, and they are succeeding in a lot of places.
It takes time, and none of these should pass in the first place, of course, but the amount of work being put in to stop them is really admirable, and I'm glad there are people with the resources and the time to be able to take almost all of these to court and fight them down. And most importantly, provide precedent that, no, these are, by and large, unconstitutional changes that you're trying to push, and both invasive and horrific as far as human rights goes. So,
yeah. So, that's been What the Trans US's first episode. That's a wrap. We've run so long. I'm so sorry you're going to have to edit this down a lot.
This is going to be a big old cut. I'm going to have to chop some sections out here.
Mm-hmm. That's fine. I believe in you. We talk a lot of stupid shit.
We do.
Feel free to cut out so much of it.
And it will be gone.
This episode of What the Trans US edition was written and presented by me, Alyssa Steinzig. And you...
Me, Valeriya Martindale, who is also the editor. Yay!
Yay, woohoo, so sorry, oh my god.
Oh, it's my burden.
Thanks so much also to Wartsara Yue Karlberg, who created our fantastic intro and outro music. You can find her socials at linktr.ee/ethereal UK music. So that's a link tree. It's got all her socials and stuff. Go check out her stuff. She's a killer musician, and you don't want to miss what she's doing.
Absolutely.
And thanks so much to our wonderful patrons. We're going to give you their names now. So starting with Bernice Roust,
Ellen Malore,
Jay Hoskins,
Trowen,
Ashley,
Maddie B,
Squidzina,
Setcab,
Jane,
Roberto Di Prunk,
Rose Absolute,
Sarah,
Sina,
Kiki T,
Derek,
Sky Kalayan,
Eric Widman,
B,
Jude,
Monsieur Squirrel,
Fergus Evans,
Anubis a Jackal,
Kamina,
Brandon Craig,
Break the System,
Sean Phillips,
Heidi Reardon,
Ezra,
Sophia the Sixth,
Lentil,
Philippa Taprog,
Alethea Aurora,
Clara Valemi,
Amelia,
Corvina Ravenheart, the trans metal DJ from Twitch and VR chat, will play Saint Lucifer for props.
Tabitha Joe Cox, aka Candy,
Fiona McDonnell,
Torikuso H,
Murgatroyd,
Ontologically Unjust,
Stella,
Cindergosa, a dragoness of our time,
Rebecca Prentice, Crazy Richard,
Dan Oblivion,
Florence Stanley,
The Cthulhu Kid,
Helen _
Chrissy Jarvis,
Al Hollingsworth bought too many magic cards,
Nick Ross,
Alice Chalkley,
Fiona Punchard,
John,
Nick Duffy,
C.V. Bailey,
Gordon Cameron,
Ted Delphos,
Wen Riverop,
Vic Parsons,
Patreon user,
Vic Kelly,
Catherine,
Sabrina McVeigh,
Cassius Adair,
Melissa Brooks,
Karakin 12,
April Heller,
Sophie Lewis,
Alexandra Lilly,
Claire Scott,
Ariadne Pena,
Lauren O'Nions,
Bernard's Pink Jelly Bean,
Lanos.
And Chris Hubley.
Thank you, all of you. Your support is greatly
Thank
appreciated.
You so much. Bye.
Bye.